Jimmy Butler is back, and the Miami Heat are suddenly deeper than ever. So, which teammates fit best around Jimmy? We open up the mailbag to answer your questions about Butler and Duncan Robinson before Nostradumbwes returns to offer his predictions for the week. All that here on Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Tuesday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me is my co-host Wes Goldberg. This episode is brought to you by Truebill. Truebill is a new app that saves you money by helping you identify and stop paying for the subscriptions you don't want or need, and can even negotiate better deals on those you want to keep. Wes, it's been a while since we've had a chance to catch up, even before the Christmas holiday. I took a day, you took a day. In the meantime, Miami keeps rolling. They keep winning. How was your Christmas holiday?
It was great. Got to spend some time with the family. I'm still at my parents' house, as people could see on YouTube. Not at the usual studio. No flamingos today, but excited to talk about some Heat basketball because, like you said, they keep it going. They've won 3 straight in a row now. You and I have handled the last 2 pods solo. We're back here.
Yeah. Who feeds the flamingo while you're away?
Oh my God, I don't even know. I should have thought. I didn't even think about that. I hope they're alive when I get back.
Wow, that is not good flamingo ownership there.
Can I tell you a true story?
Yes.
I was in charge of taking care of a cat one time. I was cat sitting, and
I don't know where this is going.
And I think it was like for 4 days, and by day 2.5, the cat was just following me around and just meowing, and I was like, this cat gets like really attached to people like really quick. That's like weird for a cat, you know? It turns out that I had just forgotten to feed it for 2 days, and it was literally just begging for food. I was doing all the other stuff, like cleaning up a litter box and everything. Literally just forgot to feed it for 2 days.
That's okay. I've got the inverse story of that. My cat, or my wife's cat, I should say, was being watched over by a family friend, and we had left one of those serving bowls where they can just kind of feed themselves after a while. Well, she ate all that because she is rotund, let's put it that way. And she kept meowing at him. He's like, well, they didn't leave him any food, these bastards. Turns out she had just eaten all of her food and was begging for more. So she got about the equivalent of a week's worth of food within 3 days. So not great. Anyway, let's move on.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel after Christmas, by the way.
Well, we do have some good questions that have been sent in. So let's start off with this one, who comes in from TJ. TJ writes to us via email. He says, hey guys, love the show. Just read this piece at The Ringer about what is the right team for LeBron James and was wondering, what's the best team to build around Jimmy Butler? That's a great question. Have not, full disclosure, read the piece over at The Ringer by our good friend Rob Mahoney. However, I always refer back to a piece that you wrote years ago. To me, it really was a paradigm shift for me, because something that you explored in that piece was how difficult it was for, I believe, Kyle Korver was the focus of that piece, although it kind of extrapolates out to other players as well. The difficulty of playing alongside LeBron James. A LeBron team is a LeBron-centric team. He is the sun in the center of that particular universe. That's just the way it works out. And so everybody kind of needs to figure out their role there. I remember talking to Channing Frye when he was first traded from the Orlando Magic to Cleveland. And I asked him, I said, what's different about your role there? He says, just give the ball to LeBron and get the fuck out of the way. That was basically how I explained it. And I think kind of that serves like as a template for everybody else. And I think the basis of Rob's piece for The Ringer, which everybody should go check out because Rob is a fantastic writer and, again, a friend of the show. But it's not easy to field the right team about LeBron James. You have to have the right players. So now,
actually, to this Rob's story, I read it at The Ringer. I read everything that Rob writes. Because, like you said, he's awesome. And he gives great perspective on the NBA and thinks about things in a very interesting and insightful way. And his point is that it's not whether or not it's hard or easy to play with LeBron. It's just that 20 years in the NBA, just about, with LeBron, you should know, if you're a front office, how to build around this guy. He's been to 8 straight finals. He's been all these things. It's like, okay, the blueprint has pretty much been laid out there and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. And for some reason, the Lakers just keep seeing this blueprint that has been proven by Miami and Cleveland twice. And it's like, we got a
We're gonna
better
go
idea.
something yeah, we're gonna do something different.
Yeah, and so and how Russell Westbrook being paired with LeBron James sort of just crumples up the blueprint altogether. It just makes because usually playing next to LeBron is relatively easy if you're a decent shooter, right? He's going to get to the lane, he's going to spray out, and you're going to have open threes like Kyle Korver had, and I talked about in my piece. But in this instance with Russell Westbrook, it's not a great fit. To relate it to the Miami Heat, what is the best way to build around Jimmy Butler, who is their best player, at least for now? And I think for the foreseeable future, and I think, by the way, this is a question every team, if you have a franchise player, as the Lakers do with LeBron, and as the Heat do with Jimmy Butler, and a few other teams obviously around the league, you need to ask yourself, what is the best way to build around that player? And it might not necessarily be go get the best available player, as the Lakers did with Russell Westbrook, right? You can make a very good argument that maybe you go get Buddy Hield instead if you're Lakers, even though I don't think anybody would argue Hield is a better player than Russell Westbrook. Everybody understands that he's a better fit next to LeBron. Have the Heat done that with Jimmy Butler?
I think they have. I look at this team, at least from a defensive standpoint, I think the fact that they've upgraded at the point guard and at the 4 position, or at least tried to reproduce, as we have often said on this show, what they had that was so successful during their bubble run, which was Jay Crowder, a versatile 4 that can stretch the floor in PJ Tucker. I think that gives this team a really good defensive presence. Offensively, I think they've also done a really good job. The only caveat with that, unfortunately, is the other all-star on this team, which is Bam Adebayo. As good a playmaker as he is, as good as he is at attacking the rim, etc., the fact that he's not a shooter kind of closes the lane a little bit, because Jimmy, much like LeBron, is he's very good at getting to the rim, very good at spraying the ball out to perimeter shooters. Unfortunately for Jimmy, he's not as good a perimeter shooter, so he only does most of his attacking in the basket. He's scoring from attacking the basket, the mid-range jumper, etc. That's where Bam is most effective as well. So you've got 2 players kind of filling that same space, and that's where things get a little bit dicey. So ideally, I think this team would be perfect with Jimmy Butler on the floor if they had a Bam Adebayo that could stretch the floor out as well as, say, Chris Bosh when he was with Miami and LeBron James.
Yeah, and this is, by the way, why people keep asking Eric Spoelstra and Bam Adebayo about his three-point shooting. It is painfully obvious. And, again, going back to LeBron here, the way to build around Jimmy Butler is very similar. They're very, very similar players. I also think about the way they built around James Harden in Houston. It's a very similar thing. You do want to clear the lane for guys like James Harden, who is so adept at getting to you could argue that James Harden and LeBron James and Jimmy Butler are the 3 guys who are best at getting to the free throw line in the league. And then maybe somewhat legitimately, Giannis is, that's a good point. Those guys and they're all very similar in that they want to do most of their work in the paint. Even even James Harden really does want to do most of his work in the paint. But with Jimmy Butler, you do just need to space the floor for him. And the Heat, as we've seen right now, obviously getting a guy like Duncan Robinson and developing him, the development of Max Strus, getting Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin developing on that 3-point shot, all these guys playing around him. I think going forward for the Heat, do you consider staggering Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler a little bit more? Because at the start of the year, they were staggering Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler in order to make sure that there was a ball handler on the floor at all times. But with Tyler Herro doing what he's been doing, you've got and Gabe Vincent even kind of developing as a playmaker. He's not to that level yet, but he's developing. You've got 3.5 kind of playmakers that you could put on the floor at all times. So does that staggering pattern now get based on Bam and Jimmy Butler? Not to say that they can't play together. They are not Russell Westbrook and LeBron James. They are not oil and water whatsoever. There's enough basketball IQ there where they figure it out. But they're both really good at playmaking from the mid post. They're really good at getting to the basket, forcing the defense in so that they can spray out and play make for shooters. I wonder if maybe that's a direction they go in once Spo gets everybody healthy.
Well, even thinking about it and using this big 3 comparison a little bit, I know, of course, it's not a perfect analogy. What was it that made Dwayne so effective during the last 3 years of their pairing together is his off-ball movement. And I wonder whether or not that's the next evolution for either Jimmy or for Bam. I can just imagine Bam kind of occupying that same baseline space that Udonis used to occupy, that Dwayne used to when LeBron was working. Let Jimmy operate from the top of the floor. Just let him control and then either drive or shoot or do something to that effect. And then in the meantime, you've got Bam kind of lingering around the baseline, off ball cutting as Jimmy drives to the rim and maybe draws a double team. And all of a sudden you've got a wide open Bam under the floor. Bam isn't the biggest player. He's explosive, but obviously because of his size limitations, he's not going to be able to just sky over players. He does a pretty good job, of course. But I think if he can operate in that kind of space, all of a sudden you're going to have that baseline wide open for him. I wonder if that's the next evolution for Bam in order just to play him off a guy like Jimmy. Of course, as we've talked about so many times, Bam, his ability to shoot the three would be even better, I think. Again, a la Chris Bosh.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to – none of them I don't think you'll see in such a defined role as those big three Heat were, just because LeBron is such a dominating presence. But they could toggle between those different roles, right? Like Jimmy Butler is an awesome cutter. Bam Adebayo is a great playmaker from the top of the key. He could play that LeBron role while Jimmy Butler is playing the Dwayne Wade role and cutting. Kyle Lowry could be playing the Dwayne role. Kyle Lowry was playing the LeBron role, bringing the ball up and getting guys involved. I mean, you could see these three guys toggling. And again, this is not a situation like this team, this Heat team. I think the pieces really fit together. And to go back to the original question here, I do think that the Heat have done a good job building around their ace, Jimmy Butler. And what's interesting and unique about it is that Jimmy Butler, being at his age right now, is not going to be the best player, the franchise cornerstone forever. Eventually, you think that's going to probably be Bam Adebayo, even though Tyler Herro might have something to say about it in a couple of years. But if you're building around Jimmy Butler and eventually planning on Jimmy handing the baton to Bam, it's the same kind of construction. You want to build around Jimmy, you want to build around Bam. So I think everything will transition quite nicely.
Maybe I should have brought this up sooner, but if you had to pick a center that would fit best around Jimmy, I wonder if it's a guy like, say, Joel Embiid, perhaps. Would you trade Bam Adebayo for Joel Embiid? And forget about the numbers, forget about the right package, etc. Would you make that trade just so it could be the better team to build around Jimmy Butler?
I wouldn't, and I know people are going to call me crazy, but I would also just say I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it.
No,
I do think that there's some equity involved in what it is that you've got going on with Bam and Jimmy. And by the way, Jimmy Butler has played with Joel Embiid. Jimmy Butler has played with Karl Anthony Towns. You could argue that the centers he's already played with are better fits on paper. I do think there's something to be said about basketball IQ and the sort of players that Jimmy wants to be surrounded by in that locker room. He wants to be around guys like Kyle, like Bam, like Tyler Herro, like Duncan Robinson, like all these developmental scrappy guys like Jimmy Butler once was, right? He was a second-round pick. This is the kind of team Jimmy wants to be around. Nothing against Joel. He obviously got along really well with Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid was not the problem in Philadelphia. But, I think that it's more than just stuff on paper, which is probably the problem with the Lakers, right? They were just sort of looking at stuff on paper, weren't really taking into account much else.
That's right. You got to have the right mentality in that locker room. And Jimmy certainly sets the tone, and Bam certainly follows it as well. But you know what? Let's move on before we get into some more questions about Duncan Robinson, and we hear from our good friend Nostradumbwes. But first, a reminder that this episode is brought to you by Truebill. Do you know why free trials renew without your consent? It's a business scam out to get you. Don't let greedy corporations pocket your money. Download Truebill to take control of your subscriptions. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 a year with Truebill because companies make subscriptions hard to cancel. Truebill makes it incredibly simple. Just link your accounts and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap. Truebill has over 2 million users and it's helped save them over $100 million. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It could save you thousands a year. That's Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks to all of you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Now you can continue to support us by making sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. We're moving on with our pseudo mailbag edition of Locked On Heat before we hear back from Nostradumbwes in the next segment. But this next question comes to us from our good pal Pete, who always writes in to us. He says, I think the inconsistency of Duncan Robinson was due to the lack of shooters around him. I would love for you guys to track his efficiency with the shooters and without shooters. This might prove the need to start Tyler Herro over PJ Tucker and to bring Max Strus in as the sixth man. What do you all think? Well, that's a big question there. Lots of moving of pieces there, Corey to Pete. I'm not sure if it's necessarily going to work out that way, but let's break down that question there. What do you think about Pete's question?
Well, I went ahead and looked at Duncan Robinson's on-off splits with all of the Miami Heat's shooters that we typically consider their shooters. So Tyler Herro, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, PJ Tucker, right, who should be considered one of those shooters because of what he can do from the corner. And I'll quickly just breeze through these. But Duncan Robinson, with Tyler Herro on the court in those 420 minutes, is shooting 37% from three-point range. In 541 minutes without Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson is shooting 31.4%. So Duncan Robinson shooting better with Tyler Herro on the court than without Tyler Herro on the court. in a relatively similar amount of minutes, right? Okay. Max Strus, let's move on to that pairing. Duncan Robinson is shooting 26.7% from three with Max Strus on the floor in 142 minutes. That's all season long. That feels low to me. I think maybe if I were to kind of track that over like the last 8 to 10 games, that's probably a better number. But for the season in those 142 minutes, that's what it is. And then Duncan Robinson in the 819 minutes, substantially more without Max Strus on the floor. He's shooting 35%. So much better without Max Strus, which I found surprising. But again, I think that might be different if you look at the last 8 to 10 games. With Gabe Vincent on the floor, Duncan Robinson is shooting 33% from three in 254 minutes, 34% from three in 707 minutes, a lot more minutes without. Relatively, again, we're talking about a very small portion, so we're going to call that neutral. And then with PJ Tucker on the floor in 689 minutes, 32.2% from three-point range. And then in 272 minutes without PJ Tucker on the floor, 37.7% from three-point range, which I found surprising just because of how many screens PJ Tucker will set for Duncan Robinson. He is so he makes it a priority to get Duncan Robinson open three-point shots. Again, so many of Duncan Robinson's minutes were aligned with PJ Tucker, particularly early in the season during that shooting slump that there is no reason for, that I think that sunk that number a little bit more. But I will say this, overall, Duncan Robinson, of all those four guys, only shooting better with Tyler Herro on the court. Not with Strus, not with Vincent, not with Tucker. Again, there's a lot of noise in those numbers, but it was just interesting to explore some of those figures.
And that hasn't been the case. Like I've made a point for the last couple of seasons when you were not on the show, that I've always found that there might have been a slight conflict, that Tyler, because of his playmaking, no, not necessarily his playmaking, because of his shot creation, specifically for himself, he's looking to handle the ball. He gets to his spot and his space in the mid range. He unloads that shot. He's not always looking for perimeter shooters, and so there always looked like there might have been a little bit conflict there between him and Duncan. Not off the court necessarily, not because of personality or anything like that. Just the way they play together might not necessarily have been a great fit. But what you just pointed out was that maybe Tyler is making some improvements as a playmaker there. But to Pete's original question, it just, I guess everybody thinks, you have more shooters on the floor, you're going to get better open looks, but that's not necessarily the case. You still need somebody like Bam to command attention in the low post, or Jimmy to drive the lane, draw a double team, and then maybe get those open looks for you out in the perimeter. That's why all the other players are shooting as well too. So is there any kind of, can you extrapolate anything from those noisy numbers, as you pointed out, other than just, he plays better or he shoots better, slightly better with Tyler on the floor? Is it not a great lineup to have multiple shooters on the floor? Because we saw in their recent win against, was it Detroit, where they had Max starting and they played well together. In fact, they were both looking for each other out in the perimeter. Like Max would drive the lane, kick it out to Duncan, and vice versa. So I don't know what to read into those numbers, if anything.
Yeah, it's hard, right? And ultimately what this question is trying to do is trying to figure out why Duncan Robinson had been slumping so much of the season. We got to start getting away from the slump storyline a little bit, because Duncan Robinson over the last 10 to 12 games has been really good. I mean, shooting like 38% from three in that time. It's just when Duncan Robinson is not shooting well, it is so loud. Like Duncan Robinson's nights where he's not shooting well, it's like 0 for 6 from three-point range. But when he is shooting well, he's right about at his career averages. So obviously you got to fix some of that. But trying to make sense of why that is, it doesn't come down to lineups, it doesn't come on any of this. But I'll tell you this, the eye test bears it out. And by the way, the trends in the NBA bear this out over the last several years. The more shooters you have on the floor, the better you are. And you want a guy like Jimmy and Bam and Kyle who could drive the paint, put pressure on the rim, and spray out the shooters, which is how the Heat have been doing what they're doing, even without Jimmy and Bam. They're doing it with Kyle. They're doing it with Tyler Herro as well, and getting out to shooters. The more shooters you have on the floor, the harder it is for defenses to close out on one guy. A defense can't put all of their attention on, hey, let's make sure our center is in place to stop the drive, stop dribble drive penetration, and then all of our perimeter guys could sort of pay attention to Duncan Robinson. When you also have Herro out there, Strus out there, Vincent out there, Tucker out there, that's a lot of guys that defense has to pay attention to. You can't put all the perimeter attention on Duncan Robinson. So I do think getting more of those guys, kind of back to the first thing that we were talking about at the top of the show, David, the more shooters you could put around guys like Jimmy and Bam and Kyle, the better off I think everybody will be. And I think the silver lining to all these injuries is finding out that indeed you have with Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, and Caleb Martin, who I didn't even include in this just because I don't think he's really respected that way yet by opponents. I don't think he's considered a shooter, you know what I mean, the way that Strus is. You got all these guys that you could put on the floor with your shot creators. I think you've now discovered that you have that if you're the Heat.
And to the second part of Pete's question, starting Tyler Herro over PJ Tucker, that seems like a done deal. Like, that's not going to happen. I can't imagine a world where Spoelstra would say, you know what, PJ, who's having his best offensive season in years and perhaps one of the best seasons of his career, is going to get benched, given his versatility, given the fact that he does so much defensively, given that he's been guarding centers effectively over the last few games with Bam hurt, etc. There's no chance that Tucker's coming off the bench. Not right now. Maybe in the playoffs, I could see the right lineup perhaps, but even then, I just don't really see it. Not right now. Unless PJ and his offense falls off a cliff, it's just not going to happen. Let's move on to one quick question here from Narayanan, who writes in, is Duncan having a relapse of his imposter syndrome with all this talent that is developing around him, or is it just a result of the lineup being mishmashed together? Now, I kind of addressed this in yesterday's Monday Madness a little bit because I did have some concerns about the way people were kind of relishing in Duncan's struggles and looking for any reason to just tear him apart and trade him and bench him, etc. And I just don't understand why that is. I do think the inconsistency, remember, Duncan is the only guy who's been starting and playing in every game, obviously with that long consecutive game streak that he's got going on right now. He's been the only mainstay over the last couple of seasons, and particularly this season. So I think the lineup mishmash, as Narayanan said, is certainly a big factor. But as far as the talent developing around him, no, I don't think that there's any way that Duncan is resentful of that or insecure about that. If anything, everything that we've seen from him and talked to him about and the way he's shown camaraderie in that locker room and understanding of the journey that these guys go through, I think he would be happy for guys like Max Strus, Omer Yurtseven, Gabe Vincent, and KZ Opala, and on, everybody else taking a step there. He's carved out his career for himself. He's got that second contract. He's not jealous of anybody, nor does he feel like he's less than they are or anything like that. So to me, I don't think there's any kind of relapse of that imposter syndrome. As I've said before, I do think there are some concerns about whether or not he's living up to the perceived value of that contract, but I don't think it's tied into any kind of imposter syndrome. What do you think?
First of all, if I never hear the words imposter syndrome again for the rest of my life, I'll be very happy. I'm so sick of that as a storyline concerning with Duncan Robinson. I understand that it was a thing.
Well,
I do think the fact that
he
said it, but the fact that it was on ESPN I think it blew it out of proportion a little bit.
Sure.
And I think that Duncan Robinson would even admit to that. He was like,
"Damn you, Ramona Shelburne."
Right. I think he's maybe a little uncomfortable about how much of that there is. And, I don't think he likes being asked about it all that much because I think he does feel like it's been blown out of proportion. Not that people shouldn't ask him about it because he doesn't like it. I do feel like it's just like one of those things that sports media likes to grab onto because it's sort of unique sounding and interesting and whatever. And I don't know how imposter syndrome works. I don't know if you have relapses of it the way if you are an alcoholic, you have a relapse of that. I don't so I don't really want to get into the psychoanalysis of it. I think you've been on point with it. I do think that just having the pressure of that contract or having that contract adds some inherent pressure of wanting to live up to it. That's a very human thing. But I don't think that there's anything going on with the other players around him as far as how he feels about himself. If anything, it takes more pressure off of him not to be the only guy responsible for spacing the floor. I think it's helpful. It takes more pressure off of him to have guys like Strus and Vincent and Yurtseven and all these other guys picking up some of the slack while these other guys have been out.
All right. We've got one more question. This one comes in from Jordan. He says, Nostradumbwes, I need a prediction. Miami has about 50 games left after tonight. How many wins do you and David think Miami can realistically get for the rest of the season? Well, you know what, Jordan? We'll answer that in the next segment when Nostradumbwes offers the rest of his predictions on this week's schedule. But first, just a reminder that BetOnline is a sponsor of this show. BetOnline, they've got you covered this holiday season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the College Bowl season and the pro football playoffs. Right now, we're recording this on a Monday afternoon, just hours before the Miami Dolphins take on the New Orleans Saints and their march to the playoffs. We'll see what happens. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code Locked On to receive your bonus from basketball, football, NHL, boxing to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season, soon to be 2022, just days away. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports, so don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available. BetOnline, where the game starts, and don't forget to use that promo code LOCKEDON. Festive spirit. Look at that. Nostradumbwes, changing it up. I love it.
So I am at, like I said, my parents' house right now. I'm out of town, so I did not bring my usual hat with me, but I did find this in a closet somewhere. So we got a little court jester hat going on here. Thanks to all who have subscribed already to the YouTube channel at Locked On Heat. If you want to get our shows hours earlier than they post in your podcast feed, make sure to subscribe to get alerted and turn those alerts on for when those episodes go live over on the YouTube channel. It is time to make our weekly predictions about the Miami Heat. But first, before we do that, a quick review of how Nostradumbwes fared last week. Tuesday, December 21st, against the Pacers, the prediction was that the Heat would hold Domantas Sabonis, who was averaging to that point 21 points and 11 rebounds in the month of December, to under 20 points. Nostradumbwes was, of course, correct. They held Domantas Sabonis to, I believe, 11 points or something like that. It was certainly under 21 points.
In front of his dad.
In front of his dad, of all people. That made it very sweet. Against Detroit on Thursday, Nostradumbwes predicted that Kyle Lowry would have 3 or more steals in the game. He had just 1, so that was not a correct prediction. December 26th, Sunday, the day after Christmas against Orlando. This time, Nostradumbwes predicted the Heat would score more than 120 points. They did not. They scored 93. So not a great week for Nostradumbwes all in all, 1-2 on the week, but it's going to be a better one, David, this week, because we got 4 predictions, 4 Heat games. We got a prediction for each one of them. Starting tonight against the Wizards, the Heat are going to win this one by double digits. Okay. They're going to finish this homestand 4-0. That's a Nostradumbwes prediction. Why? Miami over the last 5 games, 9th in offensive rating in the NBA, 4th in defensive rating, 4th in overall net rating. Meanwhile, the Wizards, 21st in offensive rating, 26th in defensive rating, 26th in net rating. To the sum of it, David, Washington stinks. The Miami Heat have been playing really good. I think they're going to win this game. I believe they're going to be a 6.5 or a 7.5 point favorite at home to finish this homestand. I think they win by double digits.
Wow, I love it. I remember when the Washington Wizards were above the Heat in the Eastern Conference standings, and somehow Miami has lost half their roster either to injury or COVID or both. And yet Miami's still right there neck and neck with the very top teams of the Eastern Conference. The Wizards now just a half game above 500 there. You know what? I love your prediction, and I'm a believer 100%. I think they're going to win big in Miami just to get a nice win before they go on a brutal 7-game road trip.
And it starts Wednesday at San Antonio. The Spurs lead the league in points in the paint. Miami allows the fewest points in the paint in the league over the last 10 games, okay? So the prediction here is that matchup, what the Spurs could do in the paint, what Miami can prevent in the paint, is going to determine the winner. That's my prediction.
It's well, I mean, you're kind of hedging your bets there a little bit, but
I love it.
I love the Jakob Poeltl matchup versus Omer Yurtseven. Yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, that's what it's building up towards. At this point, Dwayne Dedmon probably still going to be out of the lineup there. Poeltl, quietly effective, not your typical star by any stretch of the imagination. Just a good, solid player. They've got some nice depth there. It's a young team. They attack the paint a lot. You got DeJounte Murray having a close to all-star level season. He's a hell of a passer. He's like one of the top assist guys in the league right now. They've got a pretty good team. They've been quietly knocking off some teams here and there. I know they're kind of sort of tanking and rebuilding, but they're a much better team than a lot of people expected. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I think it is. And I think the way that the NBA health and safety protocols are going right now, that might be the headline matchup of the entire night in the NBA is Jakob Poeltl versus Omer Yurtseven. Friday in Houston, New Year's Eve. Jimmy Butler, hometown, Houston. Yeah. Jimmy Butler's going to be in his hometown for New Year's Eve. He's been out of the lineup 13 of the last 14 games before coming back Sunday against Orlando. I think we're going to get pictures over the weekend of a killer Jimmy Butler New Year's Eve party in Houston. He's had a lot of time to plan it since he's been out. There's only so much work you can do with Big Face Coffee. I think he's put out the feelers. He's figured out what he could do in Houston. I think they're going to throw a hell of a party. This is a Friday night in Houston for New Year's Eve, going right into the weekend. I think the whole weekend we're going to get great photos from Jimmy Butler's Instagram, from all the people that are going to be there, maybe some leaked photos of what's going on. I think Jimmy Butler's going to throw a banger on New Year's Eve in his hometown of Houston. That's my prediction for there.
Nostradumbwes. Hold on, sorry, Nostradumbwes. Who's the most random celebrity who's likely to show up at a Jimmy Butler party for New Year's?
Oh, I don't know if it's going to be random. Maybe Tyler Herro invites Jack Harlow out. Obviously, you've got the Houston connection with Travis Scott. Maybe he makes an appearance there. Kanye's been making the rounds. He's just sort of been jet setting everywhere from like Germany to China to wherever. Maybe he shows up in Houston.
No Mark
Wahlberg could show up. We know that Jimmy Butler admires Mark Wahlberg. Maybe Mark Wahlberg's got nothing to do. What's LA to? I think Mark Wahlberg lives in LA. He's Hollywood. LA to Houston. That's not that far of a flight. He could probably do that. We'll see. Maybe Pat Riley shows up Sunday in Sacramento. So Nostradumbwes made this prediction a little bit before it was recently announced, or reported by ESPN, I should say, that players who were in protocols could come back within 6 days of being placed into the health and safety protocols, as opposed to 10 days as it was for much of the season. That matters for Kyle Lowry, right? Who, if he were going to spend the full 10 days in health and safety protocols, would miss about 6 games for Miami. But if it goes down to just 6 days, then he could be back by Sunday's game in Sacramento. This could be his first game back from health and safety protocol. So the original prediction here was that De'Aaron Fox would go off for 30 points, and the Heat were going to be relying on the 3-ball to win this game. Sacramento has not been playing well. Alvin Gentry has been basically just ridiculing his team to the media lately. But this seems like a game where the Heat could get caught looking ahead to the second night of a back-to-back in San Francisco to play the Warriors. There's a lot of frustration potential here. If Kyle Lowry is available, I think he stifles a little bit of what De'Aaron Fox could do. De'Aaron Fox, a notorious Heat killer. If he goes off for 30 points, I don't feel great about this game, if I'm being honest, for the Heat. But with Kyle Lowry coming back, that obviously would improve Miami's chances. So we'll have to wait and see if Kyle Lowry is indeed available. But there are a lot of frustration potential here for Heat fans.
Yeah, I agree. But look, Kyle needs that rest. We talked about his increased minutes load over the last few games before he entered health and safety protocols. I think he's going to bounce back well. Hopefully, if he does, in fact, travel with the team. I'm sure he will at this point because they're going to be on the road for such a long time that he's likely to travel with the group. But anyway, let's wrap up the show with Jordan's original question that we asked in the last segment about the number of games left and how many Miami will win. As of this point, they've played 34 games. That means they've got 48 games left in the schedule unless there's a strange hiatus taking place. My prediction, not that anybody's asked, is that they could go 28-20. I think that's pretty realistic. I think that hovers right around 49 wins for this team, which is more or less where we see this group playing out. It's going to be tough as they're getting everybody healthy, assuming that other players aren't injured, how they incorporate them back into the lineup. But they still find a way to win no matter who is in and out of the lineup, and I think that'll remain consistent there. Yeah. Out of the 48 games left, how many do you see them winning?
Yeah, so they're on track to win 50 games this year. So I like your number at 49. That sounds about right to me. They won, 40 games last year, so that's a nice little bump if we're talking about 9 or 10 wins ahead. Yep. And that's going to matter, I think. Look, the only 2 teams last year in the East only 2 teams in the entire NBA won 50 or more games, and that was the Suns and the Jazz, who are the 2 best records in the league. The 49 wins won the East last year, right? So I think, but I think that there could be as much as 3 or 4 teams that win 50 plus games, because it's not just Milwaukee and Brooklyn who are on pace to win much more than 50 games, but you got Chicago and Cleveland. Do they fall off? Right? I would think at some point they do, but Cleveland's played a really tough schedule. They're hanging in there. They've been hit with health and safety protocol stuff lately. Chicago, we'll see. They don't have a lot of depth, but they seem like a team that could be ripe for a trade deadline move. So that could give them a little boost in the second half of the year. But I do think that there's going to be motivation for the Heat to finish the year and try to get one of these top 4 seeds in the East, which is why I bring this up. And I think they could be kind of, they're not going to be letting up, I don't think, in the last few weeks of the year, which is why I think they win probably around 50 games. That's what I think.
Yeah, I could see 30-18 over the next 48 games. I think that's another, this is a really good team. They're going to have some struggles here and there just because of the nature of COVID and the way the season is shaped out. But overall, it's been a pretty good year.
The hardest part of the schedule is behind them.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
All those
from a strength of schedule standpoint, this 7-game road trip. Once you get past this, it gets a little bit easier, and you start these home games start to kind of bunch up a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up today's show. And again, we'll be back tomorrow for a recap of that game against the Washington Wizards. A double-digit victory as predicted by Nostradumbwes. So make sure to tune in and see if whether or not he predicted that correctly. Just a reminder that you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter. Use the hashtag AskLHeat. Please be sure to subscribe to the show again and leave a review. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you also check out Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thank you so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.